This is part of a kind of crash course series on how to publish a book in 2016. I'm going to talk about book editing because if you're self-publishing your book, editing is going to be one of the major expenses that you're going to have to pay. Possibly. I don't always recommend editing your book or paying for editing. I'm going to talk about why, and I'm also going to talk about how much you should spend for editing and what to look for in an editor and how to find an editor. So to start off, you've probably heard most people say you have to get your book edited. And the reason I disagree with that advice is that I don't think there should be a cost barrier to publish your book. I don't think it's fair to say only people who can invest $5,000 on their book are allowed to publish. I think that's bullshit. So if you don't have $5,000 to get someone to edit your book, I still think you should publish your book. So there are ways to still get a pretty good book published without the editing. The problem is, of course, you don't want a lot of typos. So first you need at least to get rid of the typos. If you have spelling or grammar problems, that's kind of like a proofreading where they just find the mistakes and fix the mistakes. Even proofreading can cost a lot of money for, generally, like the industry average, I think is about 2 cents a word, like 1 or 2 cents a word. So for a 100,000 word novel, you might pay $3,000 or $4,000 for editing. And sometimes that's proofreading, sometimes it's line editing or copy editing. Copy editing is more where they see problems. And then you also have a developmental edit or a structural review where they look at the story. And what I caution you against is just paying for proofreading or copy editing, because the success of your book, especially for fiction, the success is going to depend on the story. People will forgive bad writing as long as the story is good, the story is captivating. And when they finish the book, they won't remember the writing. They'll remember the story and how it made them feel and the scenes. What you want to do is paint pictures in people's heads by describing scenes and conflicts. That's what sticks with people. That's what they're going to remember. That's the important stuff. The other important stuff is not to have, like, it's structural. So if you have a book that's just unsatisfying, it just doesn't work, it doesn't flow, it doesn't make people feel entertained, they lose interest, they put the book down, those are things that's going to kill reviews and sales. Because maybe you have a really good book, but just the story just isn't quite there, it just doesn't work. You don't want to pay thousands of dollars to get an editor to edit that story and publish it anyway, because it's not going to be successful with the story that doesn't work. What you have to do is fix the story. And so I strongly urge you, before you spend any money on editing, to buy Story Fix, Story Grid, and Plot Perfect, which are 3 books on writing fiction. I've read 50 to 100 books on writing fiction, and those are the 3 I recommend over and over again. They're newer books. They'll help you find the problems with your story and fix the problems. You've got to do that yourself, because nobody else is really going to be able to help you to do that. After you've done that, when you've gone through it a few times, you've done a lot of self-editing, there's always more mistakes. You might want to pay for an editor. I don't pay for editing, and that's because instead of paying $3,000 to $5,000 for editing, I've built up a list of beta readers. So I have a website, and I ask people to sign up if they're interested in being a beta reader to read my work. I got a couple hundred people on my list before I published any fiction. So now I get to email them my manuscript when I think it's pretty well done and get feedback. And that's a big ask. I'm incredibly grateful to have some people willing to read my book even when it's not finished yet, because that's valuable to me and it saves me a lot of money, and I also get a lot of feedback. So because I got beta readers, they found probably 20 or 30 typos or grammar mistakes, which again are crucial, because you don't want to publish, you don't want to market, you don't want people to pay money for a book that has mistakes, because it'll hurt you in reviews, because people will be unhappy with it. It's okay to have roughly 1 typo per 10,000 words, because it's hard to avoid all of them. So like in your whole manuscript, if you have 10 typos or grammar mistakes, that's not the end of the world, but still kind of sucks. You still don't want them there. And hopefully you'll get rid of them. And even when I read traditionally published fiction, I will always find at least one typo. But in self-published works, I'll usually find maybe 5. But if I find 5 or like 10 or 20, then I might consider leaving a review like, you really need to get this book edited. And those are the kind of reviews that will really hurt your book sales. So you want to avoid that by getting beta readers to go over it. You can get friends to read it. You can trade, like you can network with other authors in your genre and ask to proofread each other's books. The challenging part is, even if you get rid of all the mistakes and typos, and to do that, you need writers who are really good at English and really amazing at spelling and grammar. But you also need really experienced writers who know story, who know craft, who can look at your book and say, this is a problem, you need to fix this part. On the one hand, you want readers who read your genre because they'll know what they're talking about, but you also want writers who write in your genre and good writers who are writing successful fiction. And that's difficult. And that's kind of the thing with editors. Like, to get really high quality professional feedback from an expert who can give you the high level feedback you need to make your story better, that's where professional editors come in. So if you want to take your story, like a mediocre story, an okay story, if you want to turn it into something amazing, you might need an editor to get you to that level, that higher level. But if you don't have, like if you have a story that just doesn't work at all, if it's kind of an unfinished story, and you send it to one of those people, they'll help, but they won't be able to help that much. I would think you should focus on finishing your craft, learning how to write better stories, publishing it, getting feedback, because when you put it out in the world and you get a lot of harsh, critical, negative feedback, that's really valuable for you. It's painful, and you're going to feel really depressed and upset, but you kind of have to learn from somewhere. You have to get feedback, honest, critical feedback from regular people to learn what you're doing wrong, because it is difficult to learn how to write, and you're not going to start off being an amazing writer. You're going to start off being an amateur, and you need to get feedback to be better at writing. People will disagree with me and say you should never publish anything unless it's as good as it can be and super professional, because it'll hurt your long-term author career. That's good advice. I disagree with it because I know the majority of self-publishing authors who are making shitloads of money online started off with pretty bad books that weren't edited well and weren't designed well, but had a really good story. And when they started selling, they learned about writing, they learned from their mistakes, they redesigned their covers, they paid for editing, and they're now selling millions and millions of copies. I don't know very many self-publishing authors that started off doing everything perfectly and made a lot of money. But I do know a lot of self-publishing authors who spent $5,000 publishing their first book that aren't selling anything. And that's what I want you to be careful about, because it's easy to spend a lot of money on a book that's not going to make any money back, that readers aren't, they just don't like it. Like it's an okay book, it's a good book even, but it's just not, it doesn't have that extra something that's really resonating with readers. And you don't really know that until you've put your book out there. So that's why I focus on building my beta readers quickly, because if my beta readers tell me like they didn't like the book, or I couldn't finish it, or it was bad, if I get that kind of feedback, I won't publish, because I know it's not going to be successful. Luckily, so far, my beta readers have been very positive, and I know that the book I'm going to put out, it's still not perfect, but with a good cover design and with good marketing, it can still do pretty well. And if nothing else, it'll start building my list, because in a few years, when I'm a much better writer and I do have really high quality fiction coming out, I'll have a really big email list that I wouldn't have had if I wasn't publishing the stuff I'm publishing now. Which is why, like, a lot of authors will just publish like one or two books and they want to be really high quality stuff, I would recommend publishing a lot of stuff quickly and seeing what sticks and seeing what readers are responding to, so you can learn more about publishing, more about writing, because the education that you get from the feedback is more valuable than the education you get paying a lot for an editor. It's not that I'm saying don't pay for an editor, because you can get tons of valuable, really high-level valuable feedback from a professional editor. If you have the money, it's fine to spend money on an editor, but don't necessarily view it as an investment unless you know you'll be able to make the profit back, because a lot of authors don't. And that's what you need to be careful about, and why sometimes I think if you don't have the money, it's fine to do the best you can and get beta readers. At least make sure it's typo free and clean before publishing.